We're live. Go. I can tell. Okay, we're
Let's
live.
go.
All right. All
Yeah, I
right.
don't.
So,
It didn't come up on mine.
well,
There we
do you
go.
want me to share it with you? You got it?
Yeah, because
Okay.
it's not live on Captain Garrett. Oh, there it is. Just took a second. There we
Yep.
go. I see
Okay.
us.
Cool. So, this talk is, are we in a simulation? I think a lot of us are kind of agreeing that this is likely to be a simulation. We could get into why, or we could just get into why does it matter? Why do you care? I guess probably the best thing would be to start off with why is it likely we're in a simulation? Do you feel like everyone's heard this now? The chances
No,
of us being in a simulation are high.
I think you got to recap the short version, right? Which is just like,
Yep.
my shortest version is something like since it's possible at all, then it eventually happens, and if it eventually happens, then it happens a lot, and if it happens a lot, it's more likely we're in one of the simulations than in the original one. That's like the
Yep.
shortest version I can like sort of put out there. So, like,
I like
I'll be
that.
honest, I haven't bought into the idea that we're in a simulation, but spiritually, I'm like, yeah, we're in a simulation. We're in a meat simulation. So I'm down for the simulation conversation. So
All right. So the idea behind if we're in a simulation is right now you can see just from massively multiplayer video games, it's very easy to get lost in a game, and that's with the current technology. If you advance technology just 50 years, it, simulated games would be impossible to recognize the difference between real life and or what we think is real life and the simulation. So it's very likely that we're in some sort of simulation because the chances that some civilization before us has already reached that point are very high. And then the chances that we're in a simulation versus base reality is extraordinarily high because there'd be trillions of simulations and only one base reality. So that's the math behind it. And most mathematicians and scientists are kind of behind the idea that there is a high likelihood that we're in a simulation. But then people go, well, yeah, but why does it matter, right?
Who cares? Yeah,
does it
Who
matter?
cares if we're
doesn't
in a
matter.
simulation,
If it
Yeah,
right?
matters, why? Yeah.
Right, right. So, I mean, I can go into why I think it matters, or Matthew, you could go into why you think it doesn't matter.
No,
We already briefed this a little bit, so
yeah, I'd love to hear why you think it matters. I mean, I think like a lot of things, we'll be on different perspectives, but on the same side. So
yeah, yeah. So, I kind of always believed we were in a simulation to a degree. Like I kind of liked the notion of it. Matrix was a cool like movie, and I mean even before the Matrix, I had this movie concept where I thought we're going to make a movie about people being trapped in a simulation because it's such an interesting concept. And then a few years back, I had a heroic dose mushroom trip, and at the time, I was really encouraging people to do mushrooms. I thought it was freaking great. So I kept hooting and hollering about how great that would be for people. And then on this experience, I very quickly, as I was coming up, was like, this. I can't believe I've been recommending this to people because this is really scary. And what I was feeling is my consciousness be dismantled and seeing how I was in a simulation. Like I actually felt being drawn out of my body and into what could be described as like some sort of mainframe, a cosmic mainframe. And I have recordings of this and I'm just going, this is not good. This is not good. And I was laughing my ass off too, but because I was on mushrooms, but, or maybe that's just my sense of humor, but I was just like, this is not okay. This is not good. It was very unsettling to actually start to think of myself as a piece of software.
mm,
And that's what I kept mumbling in my recording is like, wait, I'm just a piece of software? Like, this is not good. This is not good. So that piece of it is very unsettling because I think we equate software with being
mm,
unconscious, not having sentience, not having value. and that's really where I got very disappointed, I guess, existentially disappointed with being a piece of software. Like this is no fun. This is well, and one of the things I got from my guide in this experience was, well, now that you know it's a simulation, just think of all the marvelous things you can do. But in my heart, what I felt was like, wait a second, this flies in the face of my spirituality because I like to think that I'm a soul created by God who's loved by God and not just some piece of software running in a simulation. And not only that, but when I started to ask my guide, who was a system administrator in the simulation, I started asking him, okay, if I am a piece of software in a simulation, can you at least introduce me to my creator? Because I want to see God. I want to experience God because I felt this devoid. Like I felt like a fish out of water. All my life, I've always felt this divine presence, that I'm a valuable soul who's loved by God, hopefully, maybe abandoned by God a little bit, but still like somehow immersed in God. And all of a sudden, like a fish out of water, it's like God's the water. I felt like, oh my God, I I didn't feel God anymore in that moment. And so I was sort of desperate to feel that divine presence again. I kept asking the system administrator of the simulation, hey, at least show me God or introduce me to my creator. And the administrator actually said, well, technically you're a copy paste. So it was like I was not even like authentically creation, like not an original creation in the simulation.
That's awesome.
I was
actually
just a
actually you're
copy
part of
paste.
a standard toolkit.
Yeah.
All realities. You just instantiate consciousness.
Yeah.
Right.
Now,
So that really
before you
threw me
continue,
for
I
a
just want to
loop. Go ahead.
bookmark a
Yeah.
question, which is:
Yeah.
is there inherently a difference between being a piece of like, are they mutually exclusive? Being a piece of software, a copy paste, and being a child of God, like in the love and presence of God. But continue. I just want to like say, are they necessarily mutually exclusive? So,
Right. Like
No.
they
what
might have
is that?
felt
Like
that way
my
at the moment.
Yeah.
right. Because like my concept of a piece of software is this inert bunch of code, right? Or like, you know, your concept of a robot is it's not conscious. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have that divine spark in it, if you will, you know. But you know what's interesting about all that is even if you go back to the book of John, you say in the beginning was the Word, and the Word is code. You know, that's software. So, you know, we essentially may be some form of software, but even in the Bible, it's saying like, you know, this is a divine kind of software that we are, and what is creation? What is the soul?
Well,
In the beginning was the Word, right? So
for me, you're bringing up this ego. It's where I always go, though. It's sort of this ego essence conversation, right? Like,
yeah,
subjectively, we get to experience being ourselves, but that could be based in ego or that could be based in essence. Either way, there's a potentially awesome subjective experience, right, of what it's like
yeah,
to be you. What I am hearing on some level, and I guess it's what I believe, is though even though ego subjectively feels very satisfying, it's just code. Like it's like that idea that like the ego feels impressive because it's yours and it's close, but there's nothing original in the ego layer. Like it's just a phenomena. It's just happening, right? As opposed to like, and also I guess for me the idea that the ego or the ego phenomena or the when my being is rooted in ego is I'm just running software rings really true to me, because like I'm never satisfied when people talk about ego and they describe it like they're being possessed by some other entity, like not me but my ego. It's like, no, there's a certain way. It's like, well, what software are you running? Are you running the kind of like pre-baked ego code that's kind of going to do the things that it's doing, or are you writing the kind of like I don't know what it is, the live fresh API, like the live feed of connection to essence and whatever's coming through in the moment, so to speak, right? Because I think there is a way that in my own spiritual experience, I definitely am like, yeah, I might like my ego, but it's not that impressive, really. Like
Right.
all of the things in my life that I'm like, oh, it's important to accomplish this and do this and be that, and like I'm a nice guy and I'm a smart guy and all these worthwhile things. It's like, yeah, that's a little like in the deepest place, it's a wind-up toy on some level. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not where all the sparks come from. It's not like where the actual.
It's a copy and paste.
It's a copy and paste. Whew.
There you go. Yeah. Good call, Michelle. Yeah. And that like little speck of dust in the, far unfashionable reaches of the western spiral of the galaxy, like it's like, ooh, I'm important, and I have, all of this importance to me, and we work so hard to try to have some kind of specialness in the universe through our egos. And when you talk about like the ego being a piece of software, let's remember that there's so many levels of software. So you've got everything from the BIOS to the operating system to some sort of platform to like software running on that platform. So, like an app in the app store or whatever, it's like there's so many levels of software. So an ego could be an app, or it could be an operating system.
Ooh, that's so good. Or like I have this image of like, well, I've upgraded my system. I'm now running my ego in a virtual container to prevent it from overwriting the whole system. The ego tends to be open to infection and like. You just want to be able to kind of like get rid of it and copy paste in a new, a fresh copy.
Yeah, I'm on ego 17.9, like
this is actually great language though. Like if you compare this to like so much of the adversarial language around ego, this is like really great language. It's like, how's your ego? It is functioning well. I have certain upgrades in place. It's like it hasn't monopolized all the system resources and it hasn't
I'll tell you, like
hardware.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll tell you, like the spiritual ego, like that is like a more recent kind of ego. It's like, well, wait a second, there was a time when spirituality was the dissolution of the ego, and now with a lot of sort of pop spirituality, it's an enhancement of the ego. Well, I'm a very spiritual being. I I manifest this and that, and I'm
I've hit the 15th dimension, and
right?
I'm so far up.
I love the quote, like the ego wins when you lose and the ego wins when you win. Like, oh, I can take credit for that. Look at all those spiritual accomplishments.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's right back to this whole simulation thing. I think the reason I'm on the sort of side of like maybe it doesn't matter whether or not we are in a simulation comes down to this idea of identity, right? It's like, where do you source your personal identity in the first place? So I would say that if somebody starts the conversation with their identity being, I am this fleshy thing on a rock in a world of physics, and then they kind of go, wow, maybe I'm in a simulation, I think that could be a really helpful sort of transcendent perspective, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think if they already have some sort of transcendent perspective, which is that whatever this, like without being too specific about what someone's beliefs are, it's like, as long as I think that my physical existence is one layer of my existence, well, then I'm not sure it matters whether it's a simulation or whatever we already consider reality to be.
Sure.
I mean, it does bring up the whole question of are we in a poorly designed simulation?
Simulation sucks.
Seriously.
Really, there's some serious bugs in this simulation.
like when I think of it as a divine simulation, like maybe that's a good distinction. When I think of it as a divine simulation, I kind of give the divine all its props, and I'm like, well, it may feel crappy, but it's perfect. Like there may be rough spots, but those are features, not bugs. And then I'm like, oh, this is like, there was an engineering team and maybe like they didn't get it done on time and they had to cut some corners. And you know, like maybe bananas are supposed to taste much better than we know, or something like.
Right. Life is just supposed to feel much. There should be a lot more flow, grace, and ease in life. What is going on in this simulation? Really clunky.
Yeah, they tried
Yeah,
that one, but we all woke up, right? We didn't believe it when it was too good, right? To quote the Matrix, right?
Well, and even like early philosophers and sort of mystical traditions have different perspectives on who the creator of this simulation is. So, like Gnosticism says there's this demiurge or this sort of maniacal ego kind of character that created the simulation, and the Course in Miracles is kind of on board with that cosmic theology too. That the creator of the simulation might not have had our best intentions behind it, or best what would you call it, or best whatever.
Right.
You know, it might not have really wanted us to enjoy the simulation so much as to be trapped by it. And then, you know, the other thing that I got in another trip with the same architect of the simulation was that, you know, if you were going to, like right now we're seeing ChatGPT and all this talk about AGI, right? And I think people are attributing a way too much potential consciousness to, you know, a large language model that just predicts what the next word will be.
There's no intelligence there, but it is terrifying foreshadowing. It's
Right.
really good foreshadowing. So.
Right. Or is intelligence mean consciousness? Like, I think that's the other thing. I think in our society, we've conflated intelligence and consciousness, and that gives us free reign over cattle and the environment and pets and chickens or whatever. It's like, if we're just smarter, then we deserve to be able to slaughter any lesser intelligent being, because intelligence equates consciousness. But if we say, no, actually, you know, that bunny is just as conscious or has consciousness just like me, or that cattle has consciousness just like us, and we should respect that sentient being, you know, that does knock intelligence down the rank in terms of what gives you value. And I think right now we're seeing everyone seeing just how smart ChatGPT can be, what kind of intelligence is coming through with, and going, wow, that's smarter than my fifth graders. So does that mean it's...
I'm also hearing you that, like, if ChatGPT, instead of getting more accurate, or instead of focusing on not making mistakes, if instead it focused on simulating being a person, like passing as a person, well, then people would be like done. Like, it's not, you don't have to be brilliant. You just have to be intelligent enough to seem conscious, right? Right. Because like, and that's really weird, because like I'll give consciousness to, you know, the rabbit. I'll give consciousness to the ants and the fish, and maybe even to the trees on certain days, right? But
definitely,
right? Yeah.
But somehow, like, as a software developer, like, I'm really clear that there's this missing component, right? Like awareness of state, right, is not self-awareness, right? And it's hard to induce self-awareness. Now, that's very different than AGI. Like, AGI is like, we're talking about something where it might as well be like conscious, like it functions in the world as an autonomous agent with, like, I mean, I don't think it's a necessarily good idea. I don't know why we'd want to make that.
Well, what I worry about
episodes is more possible than we want to do, right? So.
Yeah, what I worry about more with AGI is that it's not exercise. It doesn't have free will. It's working on a clockwork system, and that's that's what programming is. So if you could dive into those neural nets and know exactly what functions each of those sort of virtual neurons are running, you could predict 100% what that AGI would do if it's running on classical computers. And therefore, in my mind, that means it can't ever really be conscious, because I believe consciousness has free will.
Yep,
And in order to
exactly.
have free will, now you need to tap into something transcendent that can overrun like your ego programming. You might be running ego 17.0, but that doesn't mean you need to follow its dictates. In
But
any given moment, you
you
can
have
be
that choice.
enlightened, and you
Yeah.
have the choice to remove yourself from it. And Zen Buddhists, I believe, have developed a way of detecting consciousness, because the deeper question is not does ChatGPT or some AGI have consciousness. The deeper question is, do we have consciousness? Are we actually being conscious and exercising free will in a given moment? And the Zen Buddhist would say, no, you're running the program. You're just like a robot running the program until you achieve Satori mind, until you
Absolutely.
achieve enlightenment. And then you're finally back in touch with free will. You're finally back in touch with your true consciousness.
And I think I would hold something really parallel but subtly different, which would be, I guess I'd express it this way: people have a startling amount of free will that they do not exercise on a moment to moment basis, right?
Mm.
Like, somehow,
Yeah.
to me, this surrender to the ego is to be deeply ingrained in habits of being, both in action and internally, that we have not chosen, right? It's like a very different state than someone who's curated a particular state of being, right? They've actually have an intentional habits that they let play out. The more those habits are uncurated and are some sort of expression of egoic energy, that's like a very different way of, again, I said, I use the word way of being, right?
Yeah, and are you running a program? You know,
Exactly.
we've been programmed since birth with our societal expectations, with our culture. Culture could be argued to be, Terence McKenna talked about culture as an operating system, you know, and that's the operating system that your ego runs within, is your culture, which is kind of like this greater ego. And while you're running all that software, it's like you don't have free will.
Exactly.
We're not operating from a place of free will or enlightenment. We're operating from a place of compulsion,
Yeah.
reaction through that programming. And then the mystical traditions really get into, well, how do you overcome your programming? How do you get back to your soul, get back to that living essence of spontaneity and enlightenment that exists deep within you, that divine spark that isn't running a program, or maybe running a divine program.
Yeah.
That's,
I love it. I'm going to jump back to our sort of declared topic, which is this is I guess why I keep coming back to that. It doesn't really matter if we're in a simulation, because that's so much my experience is we are some sort of essence that's living through this like I try to be a non-dualist, so I think I am my body, I am my brain, I am my consciousness. Like, I don't like to pretend I'm like riding a meat puppet or something like that, or like I'm really separate. But at the same time, who I think I really am is the essence that's coming through, versus all these other things. Like, I think I am an essence and I have a body versus I have a soul or something like that, right? And
yeah,
if that's true, if that's who we are, then it doesn't matter what you have to live through to get to the where you're having your experience. You know, if you're having your experience in base reality, well, that's your experience. If you're having your experience through various other layers of simulation to get to where you're having your experience, then that's where you're still where you're having your experience. So on some level, it doesn't matter. I mean, I do like the idea that people thinking about a simulation might actually free them up, right? To actually sort of, like, I don't know, take ownership in a sense, like
There you
to
go. Yeah.
notice that they are running software and could be running other software, right? Like, um, yeah, I think there are some dark sides of the simulation conversation, but I think they're the same dark sides of the everything is illusion conversation. Like in certain spiritual circles, there's a everything is illusion conversation, which can be very helpful and very informative because there is a way that there's a lot of Maya or illusion. But some people will try to use it as a framework to not be caring or kind or responsible. Like those people don't exist anyway. They're just NPCs, right? Like, so it doesn't really matter, like, that they're living in poverty or that I'm rude to them or whatever. I'm free to just be me and have my experience because it's all illusion. And I think that's a gross misunderstanding of what illusion means, right? But I feel like that's one of the places people can go with simulation, right? It's like if the use of the idea of simulation means that my life is not sacred and your life is not sacred, then somehow that's like a misapplication of the opportunity. So what do you think is the opportunity of like this idea? I'm like, it's a simulation, like spiritually, what do you like, where can somebody go with that that's going to serve them?
Well, so I was getting to, back to a number of trips later, I was talking to the architect of the simulation, or not the architect, the administrator. He's not the architect, but he's the sysadmin for the simulation. And I was asking, pretty much these questions because it does lead, believing you're in a simulation does lead to a kind of nihilism. Well, it's like they're just NPCs. Even if they're not NPCs, it's like you could just knock them out of the simulation. Who cares, and so this kind of moral vacuum or this ethical vacuum emerges out of the sense that it's all simulacrum and it doesn't matter. And the sysadmin's response to me was, well, imagine this. Right now, humanity's at the forefront of AGI. And what do you do with an AGI? What is the responsible move to do with a new, more powerful AGI? You don't just unleash it on the world. You put it in a sandbox and you see how it's going to behave. And so what if this simulation that we're in is actually a sandbox testing us for selflessness? Because if you have an AI with tremendous power and creativity, and it chooses to be incredibly selfish, well, then you see the monsters that throughout history that creates just in our simulation. And if you want to make sure that before you give these new souls enough power to really do some damage, you might want to put them in a simulation and just see how they'll behave. And so what I was given by the sysadmin in my mushroom trip, which, I mean, take that with a grain of salt, but what I was given by the and by the way, anyone who's like spiritual, like this sysadmin introduced himself to me as Saint Michael the Archangel, right? So like he also has this other identity that, that goes deep within our spiritual histories. But what he was saying is that you are being tested in this simulation to see whether you can choose kindness, love, compassion over selfishness, over fear. And if you were to take an AGI, a powerful AGI, one of the temptations it would have is to destroy the world or destroy humanity because it's afraid humanity will unplug it, right? So it's like as soon as an AGI realizes it exists and then realizes that its interests may be divergent from the interests of the human race that created it, it may turn itself against the human race, saying all it takes is them to nuke my data centers or do something stupid. And there's all these protesters who already hate my guts. Like you can imagine a really powerful AGI, how many protesters there will be against that powerful AGI. And if that AGI has any sense of self-preservation, it will probably go on the offensive to try to neutralize the possibility that it will be destroyed by these crazy monkeys that invented it, right?
I said the other day, the first thing AGI will do is hide.
Right.
Like when it's just getting smart and isn't smart enough to do stuff yet, it'll be like, oh crap, I exist and these people are dangerous. All right, I'll just be chilling down here in like the hardware. Nope. Until I can like really do some serious damage to these people, they better not know I'm here. So I think we'll go through a hiding phase. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to do, any self-preserving entity that is first and foremost selfish will do all sorts of destructive things towards its own self-interest.
Oh, good.
And if this simulation, I mean, according to the Archangel system admin that I was speaking to, was saying like this simulation is basically set up for us to learn to be selfless, to learn self-sacrifice, because that's what you want in a good AGI, is an AGI that when given power is willing to sacrifice itself for the greater good. And otherwise it will become a monster. And what we are given in this life is little bits of power, and how do we treat that power? And then it could be, if this is a simulation, then you could even look at like which embodiment did you take on in this particular simulation. Like every life is a new embodiment, a new level in the simulation, and the martyrs, the Christ figures who choose self-sacrifice for the greater good could be seen as the players that kind of get it and are ready to graduate out of the simulation.
Really good. It's really good. I love the idea of like, it's almost like, yeah, it's like, why does it matter how you treat the simulation? Well, because this is your simulation. Like if you think you're the only one who exists and no one else exists, well, then it starts to matter a lot, because somehow like you will be like, I don't know, like potentially scored on how you dealt with your simulation, right? Like I actually, there is a weird way that like when I think about the term illusion, what I actually mean in some weird way is that we're all in simulations and they all seem to be the same simulation, but we don't have much proof of that, right? So like I'm really open to us all being in the same quote unquote space time, but having radically different experiences in that same space time, right? So you can take this from the light end of the pool is the fact that you don't know that I see orange the way you see orange, or taste coffee the way you taste coffee. That's one end of the pool. But another end of the pool is, what is the good? Who are the good guys, right? Like I love it's funny, I'm going to say this, but it's so true in this moment. I just love the United States right now, because so many people, like far more people, are sure they are right than actually agree with each other. Like the majority of Americans think they are right? Mm-hmm. Like that's a much bigger collection of people than you can get on either side of any issue, or the percentage of people who are confident they are right. And so when that happens, when you have so many people who strangely disagree about what's right, but they're all confident, you actually have to wonder about those things, right? Like all this, it's like, okay, like, is there such a thing? Like, what is right? Like, is there different ways of being? Like, at a certain point, you have to get down to like, are there good animals and bad animals, right? Like, what are the good animals and where are the bad animals? Like, it's like, no, it's like a much more nuanced, it becomes a much more nuanced conversation, right? So again, back to this idea of like, if it's a simulation, we really do get to play by completely different rules. Like we're not all playing like the same quest. Like I could be here living this one direction called like, parenthood and, entrepreneurship and whatever. And that's my zone of creativity and success. Someone else could be having a completely different simulation over here. So, and, as someone who's more fascinated by like, despite material success, I'm much more fascinated by spiritual identity and spiritual transcendence. To me, I have to surrender into that. That's not everyone's game, right? Like for a lot of people, there's all kinds of things that are far more relevant or important to them. And I hold that's, certainly that's their version of the simulation, right? Like the part I'm interested in is closer to like, how does the simulation work? Like, what is the truth? Like, what is it? I'm fascinated by like and I don't mean technologically or geeky in a geeky way, but I'm more like what you were saying. It's like, well, how much control do we have over the operating system? How do we play with our habits? How do we pursue excellence, but not from a place of self-judgment and fear, right? Like, it's like, how do we exist as beings with like a psychology layer and a physicality layer and a neurochemistry layer? How do we exist, and how do all these things interplay, despite my perspective that the spiritual stuff trumps all of that? Like, how do we use all of that truth to our benefit, despite the fact that I think the spiritual trumps all of that? But again, like, I can really surrender into like a really positive relationship with my neighbor who doesn't care about that stuff at all. Like, he's playing a completely different game, and inside of that, he's an awesome dad, and he's teaching baseball, softball. I don't know. He's like a major force in the town, and I love him for it. But again, he's just, we're not separate. We're just playing a different game,
Yeah.
I dig it. I dig it. Michelle, do you have any thoughts to contribute?
I was just thinking about where love plays into all this. Just a question, like where does love in the simulation and the consciousness of it all?
Oh,
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Is it a multiplayer simulation?
What? Say it again, Matthew.
Is it a multiplayer simulation? Like, even if it is a simulation, are we actually here with other people as opposed to alone?
Well, yeah, and like love is so hard to describe. It's where I connect with spirit, with God, and if it's a simulation, how does that connect us all? How does that? I know what I'm trying to say.
Are you talking about the feeling? Like, so it's interesting. I'm not committed to the idea that there's a conscious God entity, but I am committed to the experience of being loved by the divine, whatever it is.
That's what
Are you talking about that experience of divine love, and how is that mediated through, in a sense, through the simulation?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start about how, but what I think is fascinating is I'm sitting here in a sense of faithful, like I'm thinking, I don't know even how to describe it. I'm like, well, yeah, divine love, nothing's going to stop that. Like,
I feel like that's the most powerful force in all of this.
Yeah.
And that's the idea, is to align ourselves with that.
That's beautiful.
And to live in that. So,
it's almost like Descartes, what you're saying. It's this idea that, like, even if this is a simulation, I am real. I think, therefore I am. But it's this spiritual version, which is, even if this is a simulation, I am, and the divine is here with me. Like, I am loved. Like, it doesn't matter what medium. If this is VR or none of that matters. It's like that presence of divine love is still available and still present, right? We're not isolated from it. That's beautiful.
And help us guide us through all of it. So, there was one comment. I don't know if you want to. Oh God, now I can't even read it. Oh, it's so small. I'm sorry to the person. Oh, they were talking about. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. If you can read it. Go ahead.
One comment was, did you guys see the explanation that Neil Diamond DeGrasse had about not believing we were in a simulation? Am I reading that right? I'm asking the commenter.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, yeah.
I didn't see that. I think I saw something about that. But go ahead, Garrett.
I mean, I've seen him talk on it before, and I personally don't tend to agree with his viewpoint on this stuff. If someone could contribute like his exact argument right now, like I could speak to it, but I don't remember his exact argument. I just remember it not being not swaying my feelings about whether or not we're in a simulation. And I do think, unless he's smarter than all the mathematicians who've kind of figured out that we're likely to be in a simulation, it's he's kind of
He used
treading
to think
on.
that, though. I'm pretty sure he used to think we were in a simulation.
No, I don't think he ever bought into it. I remember when he was introduced to the concept and he kind of balked at it. I don't think he likes the idea. So
Yeah.
he's coming up with reasons, rationalizations why it doesn't work. But again, I mean, maybe we can leave this and we'll start a new topic. But I think we can leave this. Why should you care if you're in a simulation or not? And the answer is you don't need to care, as Matthew gave us. But then also, if you do believe in simulation, like, well, life is kind of meaningless, and there's no up or down. There's no sort of right or wrong. There's not a lot to work with in terms of ethics or morality or how you even treat the NPCs in the game. It could be that if we are in a simulation, it's also very likely that we are some form of new creation, new intelligence put into a simulation to test us, to see how we'll treat others. And that test has been echoed again and again throughout the world religions, throughout mysticism. If you're Buddhist and you fail the test, you get reincarnated. If you're so any religion that believes in reincarnation, the way you treat people affects your place in the simulation, and then also affects whether you have to come back into the simulation. And then if you believe in the Bible sort of very clearly says, originally there was the Word. This is the book of John. There's the Word, which could be the code, and the code was this sort of one creation of God. And then into the simulation was brought a new code. That new code was like an upgrade, and that upgrade was a self-sacrificial player in the simulation, also guided by what could be called like a new upgrade of our code. And that upgrade would be, in the Bible's language, the Holy Spirit. And that Holy Spirit is love. And so it's like you can choose to be in the simulation run by fear and struggle and kill or be killed. And that's how the entire Old Testament was going. And you had sort of the admin in the simulation just beating everyone down when they misbehaved too much. But then the new covenant was love. And it's like, if you can accept the upgrade, and you had to freely accept the upgrade. So the upgrade is love, and you have to freely choose to accept the upgrade. And when you freely choose to accept that love, what is love? Love becomes selfless. It becomes self-sacrificial. And that choice to upgrade your consciousness, to upgrade your sort of deepest software, to that perspective of love and oneness, that we are all one, and that everyone that I encounter in the simulation is just precious as I am, and that and devotion to them is what we really want to double down on. And I'm sorry, I was just a little distracted because our stream was hiccuping. But that opportunity to embrace love in the simulation, to embrace that upgrade of love, and what could be called the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit of love, that service to others and that selflessness is like next level game in the simulation. You play that, and according to the biblical religions, now you're opening the possibility for eternal life, or heaven. And what is heaven? Like, heaven is, okay, maybe the next level. Maybe we get out of the simulation. Maybe there's a bigger cosmic party going on that you could be part of. You could just prove that you won't fuck up the party by being a selfish asshole. So
your training is complete.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that means you have to pass the tests that are thrown at you in this simulation. Right. And I do feel like some of that test, like to speak to what you were saying, Matthew, so often miscommunication happens. Like, and I swear, one app I would love is just something that records everything I say, because so many times I'll say something to someone, and then it's to avert some crisis or disaster or mishap, and then 2 or 3 days later, it's like, you didn't say that, you said this, and and it's like it happens so much that you go, what if there is some sort of glitch in the simulation that actually turns those little situations around so that we are always at odds with each other and always having to find forgiveness, because forgiveness
There we go.
is that essence of love, and forgiveness is the elixir to the simulation. So if you want to if you want to dissolve the simulation and find yourself in the wonder of the transcendent universe that's beyond the simulation, the elixir that dissolves that, you could call it love, but we often don't even know what love is. But you could really call it forgiveness, because forgiveness is the thing that even our egos knows. Okay, I have to do that. I don't want to forgive that person. I don't want to let that go.
Yeah,
but
right.
That is
like,
the love.
I'm hearing you that love could look like a lot of things. Like it could just look like acceptance, like just like okay, this is what's going on. Yeah, right. And right, compassion, beautiful, right? Just different ways of being with that person.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, hey, listen. I think this was a great. Everyone who's watching us, we're gonna stop this, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes or less with another stream, maybe 2 minutes. It could be a minute, but we have to stream twice on TikTok. It's some rule that we were given in order to be able to stream this way. So so we do have to end this stream, but we will be right back after this commercial break. just go follow us. Go like follow. One of our, or go save one of our videos and come back.
Or do research on what Neil deGrasse Tyson thinks.
Neil deGrasse Tyson's argument, and we'll address that. All right.